The BBC launching an investigation, the Metropolitan Police beginning its inquiry. Let's just remind ourselves a little bit. If you haven't seen the documentary, it's worth watching. I watched it over the weekend, the Dispatches documentary on Channel 4. Let's just see a little bit of what they were saying about Russell Brand in that documentary.
I distinctly remember getting phone calls from women in tears the next day saying that they'd met up with Russell. They were mainly upset because they just felt used. You know, he promised he'd call me, he said he'd speak to me again, and I've not heard from him. That said, you know, I don't know what went on once they left the studio. It felt like we were essentially taking lambs into slaughter. We are basically acting like pimps to Russell Brand's needs.
Well, those were some of the allegations which Russell Brand denies, the claims that are out there in the public domain. But what are politicians going to do about it? Their house is hardly entirely in order on these sorts of things as well. There have been all sorts of problems in Westminster as well. Caroline Dinenage MP, Conservative MP for Gosport, she is chairwoman of the Culture, Media and Sport Select Committee. Caroline, thank you for joining me this afternoon. How are you?
Yes, fine, thank you.
These are very, very worrying allegations, aren't they? What's Parliament going to do about it?
Well, they are very worrying allegations, of course, allegations which have been strenuously denied, but they are serious and disturbing, and actually, more than anything, the nature of these allegations means that they are a matter for the police, not for Parliament. But I suppose what struck me over the last few days is the number of people that have spoken about being shocked but not surprised by the allegations. Okay, and that has been the theme over the last few months, where we've had a number of high-profile media figures that have been brought to the nation's attention.
And actually, you, sorry to interrupt you, Caroline, but you as someone who's been a culture minister, who's been around TV entertainment for a long time, as someone who really understands this, were you surprised when this came out? Of course, he denies the allegations. They are just claims. But in terms of this sort of thing, we sort of think a lot of this is just. I mean, it's horrendous if true. But at the same time, so much of this kind of behaviour is out there, and clearly there is a cultural problem, not just within broadcasting, but within many other organisations as well.
And that's the extent to which I think my committee is likely to get involved. We're not likely to get involved in individual cases, because that will be a matter for the police. It will be a matter for the television companies. And of course, we will be asking them to what extent they've investigated and what they plan to do to resolve the situation moving forward, to ensure that the right checks and balances are in place to protect people nowadays. These are obviously historic allegations. But I think more broadly, what we're concerned about is this culture within the media, this kind of workplace culture where you, by definition, have these incredibly powerful and influential individuals, and the extent to which the right protections are in place to prevent that power dynamic being exploited to the detriment of someone else's life, or in fact their career.
I'm not directly comparing the two cases. I need to be very careful about that. But if Parliament can certainly, I know you grilled ITV bosses over Philip Schofield, the culture of This Morning and so on. Presumably you feel you have a duty to hold the whole of the broadcasting industry to account over what may have happened, and there are just claims in terms of Russell Brand, because you've quite a lot of people involved here. You've got the BBC, obviously he was essentially sacked from that role on Radio 2 after the Andrew Sachs affair, which is quite a long time ago. You've got Channel 4 involved, you've got a production company involved as well. I mean, that dynamic between someone who is a very, very highly paid star, is fronting a big, national programme, and then the people behind the scenes who are often working a lot harder, quite frankly, who are sort of facilitating things, or allegedly facilitating things, like the kind of demands and the whims almost of some presenters. We've certainly seen that happening on various occasions. There's nothing per se wrong with that, but it's unsurprising, is it not, that some presenters and some people who are told, darling, you're wonderful the whole time, will then lose a sense of propriety within that, don't you think, Caroline?
So I think what we're talking about here are some really serious allegations regarding 4 cases of alleged sexual assault and 1 of rape. So those are very much matters for the police, and they're not things for our committee to get involved in at this stage. But we would be looking And of course, we recognise that bad behaviour outside of the workplace is very hard for any employer to legislate for. However, we do think it's important that there are the checks and balances in place to prevent these kind of power dynamics that you spoke about being exploited. And we hear a lot about talent, about this talent and to what extent it's given free rein. And if you think about this case, no one is blameless here. TV executives courted Russell Brand just on the basis of his outlandish style. Papers sold countless issues on the back of him, and even politicians wanted his endorsement. You'll recall that Ed Miliband wanted his endorsement for the 2015 general election.
And got it.
So no one is blameless, and I think so it's very difficult for us as the Culture, Media and Sport Committee to ignore it, and tomorrow morning we'll be meeting as a committee to decide our approach to it. But I think probably where we see our role being is to question all media companies and make sure that they're all doing their bit when it comes to ensuring that the right checks and balances are in place to stop these power dynamics being exploited, not only within the companies but also by those that supply them, the companies that supply them.
And it has been easy for sometimes for broadcasters to say, well, that's an independent production company, we didn't know what was happening there, we had a contract with them, all they had to do was supply the programme. But I mean, some of this, certainly in regard to the allegations of Russell Brand, is historical, but sitting here on the 18th of September 2023 at 20 to 4 in the afternoon, Caroline, are you sure, or how confident, I suppose, is a better question, do you feel that this sort of thing, if it indeed happened and there are allegations he denied them, are you sure this kind of stuff couldn't happen again, given the culture that is in the TV industry, entertainment industry at the moment?
I think there's a few things here. I mean, first of all, those are the kind of questions that we'll be asking of Channel 4 and the BBC, probably by letter to start with. We've already received a letter from Alex Mahan, the chief executive of Channel 4, setting out that they've already started their inquiries, that they haven't found any evidence of historic issues being reported to them, but they were drawing attention to the code of conduct that they now have and how they've written to all their suppliers, reminding them of this code of conduct, which not only Channel 4 employees but also suppliers need to abide by. But actually, the one thing that does concern me, and I will be discussing with the committee tomorrow, is the fact that although this particular broadcaster is no longer on those channels, he is performing almost daily on his YouTube channel and on TikTok, which between them have over 6 million followers. So I'll be interested to know what the terms and conditions are of those social media companies.
Yeah, it's interesting in terms of them sort of hosting that content as well. I wonder if I could just sort of broaden this out a little bit as well. I know you will be talking to Channel 4 and other companies as well, broadcasters. But really, if we look at a lot of these sorts of scandals, if we think about it, the police, the church, your own backyard in Parliament, the television industry as well. It's not just the people doing this stuff, what Russell Brand is alleged to have done and denies, but we know there are various people who actually have done this stuff and have been convicted of it. It's not just them doing it, is it? It's the fish, but it's also the goldfish bowl in which they're allowed to actually swim. A lot of it is management, a lot of it is a culture that is allowed to happen, and also, you mentioned the talent thing there, but the power dynamics within that as well. I mean, if you had a junior researcher on some of those programs saying, well, I'm gonna take someone back to a room and do something unpleasant to them, that would have been called out and dealt with, and that person would have been sacked immediately. Whereas there are some people who have, as we know, obviously Russell Brand denies everything, but there have been people and television personalities and politicians and police officers and members of the church and other institutions who have just got away with this sort of stuff by virtue not just of their position, but also the management and the structures allowing them to do so, Caroline.
So this is really interesting, and as you say, there is no part of society that's blameless here. I mean, as you know, industry and business world has had their cases with the CBI and Tesco BP over the last year, and politics, of course, is not even remotely blameless. I think the creative industries does seem to be a particularly difficult set of sectors with regard to this, and up until now there hasn't been a sort of single place where people could raise these kind of concerns. I also sit on the Women and Equality Select Committee, where we've been doing an inquiry into misogyny in music, and some of the reports we've heard from witnesses in our evidence sessions have been literally horrifying, of just the most horrific kind of bullying and harassment and sexual abuse, but case after case after case people haven't reported it. And why? Because they said it would be career ending, and because no one would believe them, which is why when I was a culture minister, I helped set up this organisation which has now become CISA, which is the Creative Industries Independent Standards Authority, which will be a single point of contact for whistleblowers to be able to raise issues around film, TV, music and theatre industry. And this is all backed by financially by these companies to try and provide contact for people when they have been victims of these sort of injustices.
Caroline, final question. If there was a young person in your life, perhaps leaving university, or maybe a niece or a nephew or one of your children or something like that, who said, you know what, I really want to get into television and I think production would be a good way for me to have a career, would you be supportive of that, Caroline?
Well, I think I'm supportive of anybody following their dream and following their aspirations, and I think from the conversations that I've had recently, I think that we're in a lot better place now, but I still think we've got a very long way to go before the world is a place where everybody can feel free from misogyny and free from injustices that we've been speaking about.
Caroline, we will watch what your committee does, not just the Culture Committee, but also the Women and Equalities Committee. We will watch that with interest. Thank you for that. That's Caroline Dinenage there, who is chairwoman of the Culture, Media and Sport Committee.